Welcome to our vibrant network of governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity leaders. We share cutting-edge insights, best practices, and innovative strategies to empower professionals in navigating the dynamic cyber threat landscape. Join Circolo de CISO to ignite resilience and data protection across industries.
Welcome, Chathura, to continue our conversation on offensive security. And we are here to discover the dark side of the art of ethical hacking and various other aspects. And we've had 2 episodes where we spoke about the context, the scope of the testing and what it entails. And then we also looked at the role of ethical hacking and also the ethical behavior. And today I want you to help explain why it is important to do vulnerability assessment, penetration testing. I'm also seeing in this part of the world that regulators are also emphasizing a red teaming exercise. Chathura, welcome back to the episode again and appreciate your time. Please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you for having me, Sujit. And it's a very interesting question because, end of the day, we just need to understand what this each flavor means. Otherwise, if you don't know how things done, then you'll think anyway of the right way, right? So this is where actually organizations, regulators, as well as accreditations bodies can come and assist organizations. So I'll do a little plug on one of my other hats. So I'm in the board of an organization called CREST. So CREST is a global accreditation organization who provide accreditation for and certification for individuals as well as service providers to do the right thing, pretty much, right? So the idea of that is, if you don't know, if you have misconception about these type of flavors, then you may not necessarily abused by service providers, but service providers potentially get around with things. So you just need to pretty much understand what you're getting. Just like you go buy a car, right? You should know what you're looking. You should know what you're getting. So do your due diligence. So we try to clear some of that and then provide you that bird's eye view on those things. Vulnerability assessment. In my view, you perform a scan, you identify a vulnerability, and you are not exploiting the vulnerability. You can choose this path for various reasons, right? It's not that vulnerability assessment, worthless, right? It's had every these 3 different flavors has their place in the world, right? So vulnerability assessment is just understanding, yes, this vulnerability exists, and we provide assessment on what if this is exploited, right? So we can take, for example, this approach to test really high sensitive systems. Red team, not just preventive, we just go beyond that detective response controls to see if the organization has capability to detect and respond to these threats.
Yeah. So Chathura, I have one specific question which comes up in all the conversations we tend to have with clients. Yeah? When you use a standard tool, and I think today the world is moving towards platformization, so where all these services are available in a platform, and it also gives you a vulnerability score. And also it tells you whether the vulnerabilities are exploitable, whether it is widely exploitable or that it is vulnerable but could be exploited. Now, there is always this perception, right? I use the word perception, is that you fix only the high value scores and you do not have to worry about attending to any of them which has a lower score. Is that assumption correct?
That is well, it's depend, but it's a fundamentally flawed assumption because I understand from a priority wise, for an organization,
Mhm.
you don't have all the resources and money and the time in the world to address every single vulnerability. So having a score or the risk score is a great way to prioritize, but that does not really mean you should be only patching or fixing high risk vulnerabilities. So if you
Right.
look at one of the threat report released last week around a certain APT group known as Velvet Ant. So they were
Mhm.
actually exploiting a Cisco authenticated code injection vulnerability, which only had a CVSS score 6. So it's not a high risk vulnerability, just like a medium risk
Yeah.
vulnerability. No one really cared.
Correct.
But the thing is, with that vulnerability, they could achieve persistence in the network, right? So we need to look at broader implication to the organization. And also sometimes, this is like a cool thing about bug bounty and, pen testing. We don't necessarily need to find one high risk vulnerability to bring down the organization. What we can do is we can actually chain number of low risk vulnerabilities to demonstrate a high impact, right? So that assumption is not a great assumption.
It's a flawed assumption. Right?
Absolutely. It's a
Yeah.
fallacy,
So
yes.
I'm absolutely right. So the concept of zero trust will also fail in instances like this. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, correct. There's no silver bullet, right?
absolutely. So the whole idea of a security framework and best practice implementation is to minimize the impact or make it harder for the threat actor to
Correct.
target. But if he's persistent or if he's persistent and if the organization is in that bracket of a high target, they're going to spend all the resources available and probably wait the time to get
Correct.
in. Right?
Yep.
So they would spend that amount of time to definitely exploit even the lowest, the least vulnerable or the least score to exploit it and gain access to that valuable resource. So
100%.
the question I have was, you very rightly, in a very simple way, you said the vulnerability assessment is the foundation. You identify the vulnerabilities, then you test the preventive controls using penetration testing, and then using red teaming, you test not just the preventive controls, but also detective and the response controls as well. So, in other words, it is going to touch multiple segments of an organization, the people, process, and the technologies as well. The question I have for you is, should all these things be a black box testing or a white box testing?
They both has their own merits, right? So if you're testing an application, if you tell me about the architecture, if you tell me about things I can actually tell you after the assessment, I can tell you things you don't know. So you actually increase your return on investment. But if you didn't tell me any of that, half of the things I'm going to tell you anyway are the things you know. So still, there's this merits, but I think I lose some value there, right? So white box testing
Absolutely.
comes in that way. But when it comes to testing detection controls, testing response controls, I think black box is the way to go because you're testing somebody else's role to play in this ecosystem, right? Having said that, so this is where I'm going to contradict myself. I love saying this. But the thing is this, right? So doing that black box sort of assessment, like red teams, so it's kind of creating an adversarial relationship with attackers and the defenders of the organization, right? So in order to tackle that, what we can do is we can call blue team is defenders, red team is attacker, right? So let's merge the colors, right? Mix it a bit. We call it purple teaming engagement. So that's where red teams and blue team work together, collaboratively test the organization defense. So that's help you to get around that adversarial relationship and then actually push the organization in the right way. But you can't just do the purple teaming on day one. Red teaming, you can't do it on day one, right? So you need to make sure you do the whole cycle of vulnerability assessment, penetration testing to measure the organization, then do red teams, then do purple teaming to take it to the next level, right? So just because you want, you can of course get the service from service providers, but you're not maximizing the return on investment. Just doing things here and there, right? You need to strategically attack these challenges.
So, Chathura, in this episode, primarily we focused the importance of vulnerability assessment, why we need to do penetration testing, and of course, we spoke about the red teaming. And you also briefly touched on the blue teaming and purple teaming. And I'm going to hold all the questions I have around that for our next episode. So we will actually talk about a little bit about advanced persistent threats, the role of Security Operations Center, and the incident response in the upcoming episodes. Chathura, thank you so much for taking time to share your experience. See you in the next episode.
Thank you for having me, Sujit.